I wonder if you have ever, many of you, of course, may not have had the experience, I have, and I'm sure many of you have, of standing in a church, maybe in a revival meeting, and singing along with the invitation hymn, Just As I Am, or Oh, Why Not Tonight. And in between verses, the preacher will pause and he'll make his little pitch along the way about how important it is for you to make this decision now and not put it off. And one of the things, they'll often say something about maybe you're stepping out off the curb and the car will run you down, or something like that might happen to you. But one of the most frequent ones is that Jesus Christ might come tonight. And then you wouldn't be ready for him if he were to come tonight. I don't know why. I don't recall hearing them say he might come in the morning or he may come today. It's always tonight for some reason. But Jesus Christ may come tonight. Is that true? Is that possible? Is it actually a possibility that Jesus Christ might come tonight? Well, now, for you, that certainly could be true in the sense that you might step off the curb and the car run over you out there in the street, and indeed for you, that's it. Next moment of your consciousness, you'll be with Jesus Christ. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fulfillment of that promise that Jesus gave. When he left, he says, if I go away, I will come again. And the other promise made by the angel, that in like manner as you have seen him go, so shall he come back to the earth again. I'm talking about the time of the literal return of Jesus Christ to this earth for his saints and the establishment of his kingdom. Could that happen tonight? Well, I want us to take a look today again at some of the prophecies having to do with Jesus' return rather systematically and answer not only that question but perhaps a few others. But instead of saying, well, where are we right now in prophecy and kind of working our way forward, let's go forward first to the return of Christ and ask ourselves first, what is going to happen at the return of Christ? 1 Thessalonians 4 is our starting place today. A rather interesting scripture. The Apostle Paul really had no intention of entering into the question of the return of Christ when he started the letter, I don't think. But it became relevant to a point in this particular church, which had suffered a great deal of persecution. Not a few people in this area had actually died for the faith. He says in chapter 4, verse 13, But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep. Some people had died in this church in the persecutions that had taken place. That you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain to the coming of the Lord shall not prevent, means basically go before or precede, those who are asleep, those who are dead. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Now that's simple enough, this particular item. You have to put this together with a few other scriptures, but I think it's important to establish first of all that the return of Jesus Christ that is spoken of here is not necessarily done off secret in a corner, because there's this giant shout that's heard from the archangel over over the entirety of the earth. But perhaps more importantly, the resurrection, a general resurrection of the dead takes place, and two might be grinding at the mill. One is taken, the other is left, because the saints at that point of time are changed into spirit beings. So this is not something that you just, that happens and nobody's even aware that it's taken place. This is a real, literal, bodily return of Jesus Christ. The resurrection of the saints takes place, and of course, as I mentioned already, a shout of the archangel takes place. Now turn back to 1 Corinthians 15 to a parallel scripture with it, which gives us perhaps just a little bit more on it. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, and verse 50. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. Now he tells us just a little bit more than Paul did to the Thessalonians, where he said the trump of God, there's the blowing of a trumpet. Now he says at the last trump. Now the making of the last trump clearly implies that there were trumpets that existed before it, right? There may have been 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 that preceded it, making this one the last, and we're going to see, of course, that it not only is the last, it is the 7th and last of a 6-trumpet series. So the trumpet shall sound, the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. And he goes on to describe the importance of the resurrection, what it means to a Christian, but that is another matter. So, We find in this that it's at the last trump, that it is sudden, it's quick, it's in a moment, a twinkling of an eye. The dead are raised, others are changed. The Lord descends from heaven with a shout of an archangel. So this particular pattern of events falls together for us. Now turn back to the Olivet prophecy and the account of it that is contained in the 24th chapter of Matthew, and pick up just a little bit more about those events connected with the return of Christ. And then when we have established that, we're going to back up from the return of Christ and ask the question, what happens immediately before? In Matthew 24, beginning in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon will not give her light, the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and with great glory. So we're talking about the visible return of Christ. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. So we're at the same time. And they shall gather together the elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. The same time, again. So we're dealing with awesome signs in the heavens. We're dealing again with the visible return of Jesus Christ in clouds of heaven. We're dealing with the sound of a great trumpet, not just a small one, and the gathering together of the elect from the four winds of heaven. All right, then Luke, the 21st chapter. Luke chapter 21. I have a little trouble with my notes with the breeze I've got here. Luke 21. Verse 25. And there shall be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars, and upon the earth, distress of nations and perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming upon the earth. The powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And they shall see the Son of Man come in a cloud with power and great glory. When these things begin to come to pass, then lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. Before I continue, would someone mind turning this fan off behind me? It's making it difficult for me to keep these things together up here. So, the return of Christ is immediately preceded by heavenly signs, the sign of the Son of the Man in heaven. He's going to be seen by the tribes of the earth who are going to mourn over it. The elect are gathered, and the trumpet sounds. So putting everything together, it all comes in. Now, I want you to turn back with me to the book of Revelation, chapter 11 and verse 15, where we actually come to this last trumpet that we've been talking about up to this point. Revelation 11 and verse 15. There have preceded this 7 trumpets, and this is the last of the 7 trumpets, the one that Paul spoke of in Thessalonians, the one he spoke of in Corinthians, the one that Jesus mentioned in his own accounts of the resurrection and his return. And the 7th angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. I would presume that when it speaks of a great shout of the archangel, that this must be the content of that shout. The proclamation, as it were, that the kingdoms of this world are now become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. And the 24 elders that sat before God on their seats fell upon their faces and worshipped God, saying, we will give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which are, and were, and are to come, because you have taken your great power and have reigned. And the nations were angry, and your wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that you should give reward to your servants the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear your name, small and great, and should destroy them which are destroying the earth. And the people of God, the temple of God was open in heaven, they were seen in his temple, the ark of the testament, and there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail. Now what do we know about the return of Christ? Well, we know perhaps a bit more, that not only is there a shout, but there's a proclamation of the beginning of his kingdom that is given at this time. Also, we notice that it is the time to destroy those that destroy the earth. Because apparently the time leading up to this is a time of absolutely incredible destruction. And one of the objects that takes place here, the object of this exercise, is to stop the destruction that has been going on, that's been leading on up to this time. But before we get into that, what happens just before the return of Christ? I got to thinking about this not long ago, and I thought how often it is that when we start speaking about prophecy, We say, okay, where are we today in prophecy? And we start with Matthew 24 and other scriptures, and we sort of work our way forward through the book of Revelation, through the 7 seals, and then through the 7 trumpets to the return of Christ. But I began to wonder about some things, and so I decided I would go to the return of Christ, and I began to work my way back from the return of Christ to try to understand what those events are, what takes place, how long does it take, is there anything of importance for me as a Christian to learn in studying my way back from the return of Christ. So what happens immediately before the return of Christ? All right? In the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verse 15, the sounding of the 7th trumpet, the appearance of the resurrection of the dead, the rewarding of the saints, obviously the time when Jesus Christ appears in the heavens and the nations begin to mourn, obviously the time he takes in hand to bring to a stop the destruction of mankind. We will talk about it later perhaps, but the instrumentality by which he stops this destruction are the 7 last plagues, which are mentioned in subsequent chapters to this. Let's go back now in Revelation 11 to the first verse of the 11th chapter and make our way up to, again, the 7th trumpet and consider what goes on, how long does it take, and what are we looking at in the world just prior to the return of Christ. There was given to me, he says, a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise, measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court that is outside the temple, leave it out. Don't measure it, for it is given to the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Now this is rather interesting. We have a very simple advance of time, and it seems consistently throughout the book of Revelation that the use of year and months or times involves the 30-day month, 12-month year without any consideration of intercalation, the intercalary years, or anything of the sort. So you can actually wind up with a 13-month year perhaps somewhere in this period of time, but it does not refer to it. It just seems to use the sort of an ideal model of prophecy. We could discuss some possibilities. We will when we go back to one of the trumpets in a moment. But nevertheless, at this point in time, it talks about 42 months, which is essentially 3.5 years. They are 30-day months, which gives us a simple period, 12.5 years. 1,260 days, 3.5 years. And this pattern, or this period of time, is spoken of again and again and again. Now it is interesting that he says, the court that is outside the temple leave out and measure it not, for it is given to the Gentiles. And the holy city they shall tread under foot 42 months. Where else do you read something about Gentiles treading the holy city underfoot? Turn back, keep your finger here. We'll be right back here in a moment. But we're going to turn back to Luke, the 21st chapter, where we were again a moment ago. Luke 21, verse 20. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed about with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then, at that moment in time, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. This isn't a command to Christians by and large around the world to flee at this point. This is a command to those who are in Judea to flee. He says, Let these be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written may be fulfilled. Woe to them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress upon the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and be led away captive into nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. How long is Jerusalem to be trodden down of the Gentiles? Revelation 11, verse 2. The holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. They're going to tread, and it's going to be trodden down of the Gentiles. How long? Until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. When are they going to take it? When you see Jerusalem compassed about with armies. Where did we ever get the idea that the times of the Gentiles was 2,520 years? When a simple comparison of Luke 21 with Revelation 11 says the times of the Gentiles is 42 months. Isn't that what it says? I mean, by just putting them together, it's trodden down of the Gentiles 42 months. It's trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, perhaps there is some indication of the times of the Gentiles over some long period of time, like 2,520 years. But it is, a pretty esoteric doctrine. Reaches a long way back, and you have to go through a very convoluted line of reasoning in order to arrive at this conclusion. Whereas in actual fact, it's a very simple comparison of two scriptures to let us know that in this application, the times of the Gentiles is a short 42-month period, 3.5 years. So, We're looking at a time when Jerusalem is compassed about with armies, and a subsequent period of time, beginning in Revelation 1 and going through to Revelation 15, which is very precisely identified in time. It is 42 months. It is 1,260 days. It is a time and half a times. It is 3 1/2 years, give or take a month. Maybe because there is an intercalary month involved in it, which we will perhaps refer to a little bit later on. All right. During this period of time, he says, I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Same period of time. At the same time as Jerusalem is trodden down of the Gentiles. These are the 2 olive trees, the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the whole earth. Now, this is a reference back to Zechariah 4. He says, the 2 olive trees. You can go back and compare it, but mainly, this particular statement is given to clarify Zechariah 4. There's not much in Zechariah 4 to clarify what's taking place in Revelation 11. Revelation, remember, is the revealing, whereas Zechariah is what is being revealed by this. If any man wants to hurt these 2 witnesses, fire proceeds out of their mouth and devours their enemies. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the day of their prophecy. They have the power over waters to turn them to blood, to smite the earth with plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, shall overcome them, and kill them. This is the end of 3 1/2 years. Their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified, which is, of course, Jerusalem. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half. They're not going to suffer them to be buried. They're going to stare at their bodies. They that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, make merry, send gifts to one another, because these 2 prophets tormented them that dwelt upon the earth. After 3 days and a half, the Spirit of life from God entered into them. They stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. They heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up here. And they ascended up into heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. In the same hour there was a great earthquake. 1/10 part of the city fell, and in the earthquake 7,000 men died. And this is right at the return of Jesus Christ. The remnant were affrighted and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past. Behold, the 3rd woe comes quickly, and the 7th angel sounded. Now, we've already been there. We're at the return of Christ. All right, now what do we know? We know that for a period of time, roughly 3 1/2 years prior to the return of Christ, Jerusalem is an occupied city, occupied by the Gentiles. Other scriptures will tell us that the daily sacrifice was taken away, which implies that the daily sacrifice was established. Other scriptures will tell us that an abomination of desolation will be placed again, which Daniel spoke of, which we will discuss later on. But for 3 1/2 years, 2 witnesses of God will be prophesying in Jerusalem, headquartered there. But now wait a minute. As we were reading along here in this particular passage, he said, the 2nd woe is past. Behold, the 3rd woe comes quickly. And this trumpet is the 7th trumpet in a series of 7. What about all of this? Where does all this type of thing originate? What about those trumpets that came before? Well, now, if you'll turn back, again, we're going to keep on working our way back to the 8th chapter, verse 1, the book of Revelation again. Now, when he had opened the 7th seal, now we move back into, if you're not familiar with the book of Revelation, you'll have to bear with me a moment. We move back into the first 7-fold division of events that lead up into the end time. They're called 7 seals. And the 7th seal, which is here ripped open, is one which comprises the 7 trumpets that we're talking about. So when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. There was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense that came up was the prayers really of the saints before God. The angel took the censer, filled it with the fire of the altar, and cast it to the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightning and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Now, you have to be a little bit careful in trying to equate or interrelate events in the book of Revelation and the other prophets by some of the events. I think we are prone, when we read something like where it says there was lightnings and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail, that we feel that, and of course, indeed, if there were no other situation that would ever exist except one where there would be lightnings and thunderings, earthquake, and a great hail, perhaps fire mingled with blood and this sort of thing, if that never happened any other time, then you could use that as a benchmark to identify the time. But the problem is you have no way of knowing whether that is the only time that there would be an earthquake, or an earthquake with thundering and lightning or great hail. And so you have to be a little bit careful about interrelating events based upon things like earthquakes, heavenly signs, the sun becoming black as sackcloth as hair. Now, who's to say it doesn't happen more than once? Who's to say there isn't more than one occasion where some great earth-shaking signs appear in the heaven, when a number of people are killed in a city from an earthquake? These type of things, one must be somewhat careful in making interrelations in your prophetic studies on them. Okay. Now there follow 7 trumpets. The last 3 of these trumpets are called the 3 woes. The reference is chapter 8, verse 13. I beheld an angel flying through the midst of heaven, this is right after the 4th trumpet, saying, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound. And so the 5th trumpet is the first woe. A little confusing, isn't it, right off the first of it? But nevertheless, the 5th, 6th, and 7th trumpet are the 3 woes. The 5th trumpet is the first woe, the 6th trumpet, the 7th. Boy, I'm really having a lot of trouble with this myself. The 6th trumpet is the 2nd, and the 7th is the 3rd woe, which it was spoken of when we read over in the next chapter, or the 11th chapter, about the 7th trumpet. All right, let's go to the 6th trumpet. Again, trying to follow our principle of backing our way up from the return of Christ. Now, keep in mind, as we do this, that we are backing our way up through that same 3.5-year period. The 2 witnesses are in Jerusalem, doing whatever it is that they're going to be doing, bearing their witness that is there. So you're not lining these up. Some of these things sit right along parallel with one another. The 6th trumpet, Revelation 9, verse 13. The 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Turn loose the 4 angels which are in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed which were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen was 200,000. I heard the number of them. Now, in this 6th trumpet, the 2nd woe, we're dealing with some pretty firm specifics. He's not generalizing when he talks about the length of time. This 6th trumpet is a very specific length of time. And it's numbers which have no mystical significance, like 7 and 12. Oftentimes when you find the number 7 or the number 12, it's not the literal number that is being used in the text. The number is being used because of its mystical significance, of perfection or totality. And 12, comprises 3 times 4, which are 2 different ways of looking at wholeness or perfection. The numbers 3 and 4 are interesting because 3 plus 4 makes 7, the number of perfection. 3 times 4 makes 12, the number of wholeness or totality. So it's a rather interesting combination, but there's none of that here. There's none of that here. Here we are dealing with a year, a month, a day, and an hour. Not only that, but we're dealing with an army of very specific size, 200 million men. Now, what are we talking about here? Is this something that God is doing? Actually, it is not. This is describing the release by God of something which would have otherwise been restrained. The powers of a certain nation upon the face of the earth, capable of mustering an army of 200 million, and in the process of the battles that are going to go on in the length of time of a year and a month and a day and an hour, 1/3 of the population is dead. This is just before the return of Jesus Christ. The world could hardly be said to be in peace during a period of time when that kind of chaos is going on. And yet, there are other prophecies which kind of lead us to believe that the world immediately before Christ returns is at peace, or at least part of it is at peace. Could it be that part of it is and part of it is not? Interesting question, and something to bear in mind as we continue on. He said, I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone. The heads of the horses were like heads of lions. Out of their mouths issued fire, smoke, and brimstone. And, here's a man who's in vision. And he's trying to describe something which he has never seen before in his life, and in fact which you and I may not yet have seen, for it may not even be in existence yet. But nevertheless, I think a humanly devised type of instrument which is able to scorch the earth ahead and leave it steaming behind as it goes on by it. By these three was a third part of men killed, by the fire, the smoke, the brimstone that issued out of their mouth. For their power is in their mouth and in their tail. For their tails were like serpents, and had heads with them they do hurt. The rest of the men that were killed by these plagues, were not killed by these plagues, did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone. They did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. They just carried on. It was business as usual in spite of everything that has taken place in this sixth trumpet, which is the second woe to fall upon mankind. Very specific then, a third of the men slain in a war lasting for 13 months, 1 day and an hour. I halfway wonder about this extra month, if by some possibility this is an intercalary month. If you're not familiar with the Hebrew calendar normally has 12 months in each year. And instead of having leap years like we do and odd-numbered months to make the 365 days, the odd numbers of days are made up about, I forget how many times in a 19-year cycle. So every so many years, an intercalary year is added, where a 13th month is added to the Hebrew calendar to adjust it out. In a 3.5-year period, the odds would favor the fact that one of those years would turn out to be an intercalary month. So that you would have, and the implication of this is that the last year before Christ returns would be a year in which you had a year and a month and a day and an hour. All of which is rather interesting, but a little bit hard to pin down, even in spite of how specific it is as we go along with it. So the sixth trump, a very precise time. Now remember, Jesus wrote, he actually spoke in the Olivet prophecy, and it was recorded by Matthew. He said the time was going to come, and that there was going to be incredible tribulation upon the earth, incredible trouble. He said it's going to be a time of trouble which has not been since the beginning of man, nor will ever be again, a time so severe that unless the days were shortened, unless somehow he cut it short, he said there would no flesh be saved alive. There wouldn't be any human flesh living, or perhaps animal either, on the face of this planet unless he intervened to stop it. That's what it means when it says the time has come to destroy them that destroy the earth. Man is going to be, at the time of Christ's return, in the process of creating ultimate, total destruction. All right. Now, so far, we've looked at the last two woes. The last one is the seventh trumpet, and why it is a woe will have to be explained another time, because it involves the 7 last plagues. Now, the fifth trumpet, or the first woe. Chapter 9, verse 1, backing our way up a little further. The fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth. To him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose smoke out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. The sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. There came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and to them was given power like the scorpions of the earth have power, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass, no green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. To them it was given they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented for 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he strikes a man. What on earth is this? Some sort of chemical warfare? Nerve gas? Something which does not harm buildings or trees, apparently, or grass. Any green thing is absolutely untouched by it. But for a human being, incredible agony. I've never been shot by mace, but I understand the pain is absolutely blinding that you experience when you actually have a drop of that which is nerve gas, I assume. It touches the surface of your skin. I gather it destroys all the fat on the nerve endings that act as a buffer, and so your nerves are just absolutely raw. And it is an incredible pain that a person suffers. Whatever this is going to create that kind of a situation, an immobilizing pain in a certain population that is going to last for a period of time of 5 months. Now, interestingly enough, we again have a very specific period of time in which a war again is fought, in which nerve gas is spread out abroad, which doesn't hurt plants and trees, but which does torment and doesn't even kill men, but paralyzes men for a certain period of time. 5 months. So we've worked our way back a cool 18 months. Before 18 months, a day and an hour, as a matter of fact, before the return of Christ or before the blowing of the seventh trumpet for the period of time of these two woes. and we work our way into the third woe, which I don't think goes on for very long at all. The impression that you have there is that that may be nothing more than about a 30-day period of time, or perhaps a month and a half. And I'd have to explain to you another time perhaps why I think it might possibly be a month and a half. So we have a precise time for the fifth trumpet, and we have a precise time for the sixth trumpet, bringing us back a cool year and a half prior to the return of Christ when these events take place. So we have a fairly specific thing taking place. Now, could Jesus come tonight? In this sense, it's impossible, for there are things that must happen. There are things that must be done. Now, prior to this, there are yet 4 other trumpets that are blown with plagues connected with them. What is this all about? In verse 7, the first angel sounded, there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt. Again, a form of destruction which leads one to wonder if you're dealing with some sort of chemical or biological warfare. The second angel sounded, as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. A third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Someone commented that when the Torrey Canyon ripped its bottom out on the reef over there in England, that had it been carried in herbicides instead of oil, that it probably would have resulted in the destruction of all animal and human life in the island of Great Britain for a rather peculiar reason. It would have destroyed all of the oxygen-producing plankton at the surface of the sea for the whole area around there. And the result of which would have been there would have been no oxygen. And, of course, the plant life in England as such is not sufficient. England was in danger, according to this source, of smothering when that took place. And the things that men dump into the sea and the incredible effect of those things now is just absolutely mind-boggling as far as how far it could go. I used to marvel. I'd read these things and I'd think, boy, that's incredible. How could that possibly take place? Will God do that sort of thing? And I began to realize after a period of time, as technology progressed, that now we didn't have to think of a miracle. It was no longer necessary for God to do these things. Man is capable of doing it. So why let your mind boggle over the fact of some of the things you read in the book of Revelation? It no longer calls for God to do them. The third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven burning like a lamp, and fell upon a third part of the rivers and mountains of waters, and the name of the star was called Wormwood. And the waters became bitter, and many died because of the poisoned water. The fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and a third part of the moon, a third part of the stars, so that a third part of them was darkened. And the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. What happens? Volcanic eruption? Or something that man has done? A great pall of smoke in the sky? Some new kind of warfare that we have not even heard of yet? How long do you suppose this entire period of time is of these 7 trumpets? Probably 42 months. Now, we don't know how long the first 4 trumpets are. There are no times laid out for them. There is no specific like there is on the last 2, but we do very specifically know that the last 2 of these trumpets before Christ's return were simply a year and a half. Now, why would I conclude the possibility that the remainder of the 4 make a total of 42 months, 1,260 days, 3.5 years in all for the 6 trumpets? If this is the case, then these trumpets could very easily represent the period of time of Satan's wrath as exercised through the beast power, who himself, remember, is in power for the sum total of 42 months. I think it's Revelation 13:5 that says this, that describes this great beast that came up out of the bottom, or out of the sea, I believe, and goes through all of his heads and horns and everything else, and it finally comes down and it says power was given to the beast to continue 42 months. And here you are with this unbelievable warfare, chemical warfare, destructiveness of mankind going on for a period of time of over a year and a half, reaching on out toward a 3.5 year period, and one begins to suspect that it may be that these wars are all, for the most part, at the instigation of the beast power, or at the very end, his ultimate enemy, which we will come back to in a moment. Now, note Revelation 9, verse 4, verse 4, talking about the 5th trumpet again. It was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Who are these people that have the seal of God in their foreheads that are not going to be hurt by this? Well, here are some human beings alive on the face of the earth at this time, which are in some way going to be spared all the things that take place. All right, let's work our way back a little further. Back now to Revelation 6 and verse 12. I beheld, and when he had opened the sixth seal. Now remember, the seven trumpets all comprise the seventh seal. So we're moving our way back now just a little further. I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. The stars of heaven fell to the earth like a fig tree casts her untimely figs when she is shaken of a wind. So you have an incredible meteor shower. You have possibly a volcanic eruption which has put a great pall of ash out so that it actually darkens the face of the earth and the sun. The heaven is departed like a scroll when it's rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Incredible earthquake. What exactly is hard to tell at this point in time. The kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the mighty, the chief captains, every bondman, every free man hid themselves in the dens and the rocks of the mountains and said to the mountains, fall on us, hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? After these things, I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor the sea, nor any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees. Now this is describing all these things that are going to be happening here very soon. Don't allow any of that to happen till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Now when I heard the number of them that were sealed, there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. All these numbers. Dan is left out for reasons that are not given to us. They speculate because Dan was the first of them to go into idolatry. One commentary speculated because of the small number of Dan, they might be included in Naphtali, his brother by the same mother. Ephraim is not mentioned, but Manasseh and Joseph are. The implication is that because Joseph's name is named on Ephraim, that Ephraim is mentioned in Joseph that is there. After this I beheld a great multitude. Question: why is it that no Gentiles are mentioned as being sealed among this group of people? Why aren't they mentioned? Now, the people we've often gone on to say, after this a great multitude, which no man can number, of all nations and kindreds and people. But it doesn't say that this great multitude of people are sealed. Look at the description. It said they stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. These are not human beings living on earth during some great tribulation. These are people after the resurrection from the dead. He is in vision, remember. And everything doesn't happen in straight line order. He just says, I saw this great, giant, innumerable multitude, couldn't count them, of people surrounding the throne of God, and of all nations and kindreds, including Israel, Gentiles, and anyone else that are in the kingdom. But it doesn't say word one about a Gentile being sealed at this point in time. Why? Could the answer be that the events that are about to take place are not going to happen to Gentile countries, but are going to happen to Israel? Why not? We've tended to assume, as we read on through this, that this thing is global in scope. And the wording of it would tend to lead you in that direction, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. And when the sixth seal is opened, and this, wait a minute, is said, and he says, let's seal the servants of our God in their foreheads so that they are not hurt by what is about to take place. He seals and protects 12,000 out of each tribe of Israel, possibly an ideal number, not meaning specifically that many, but having to do with the spiritual significance of the number rather than the literal, but maybe the literal. 12,000 out of each of the tribes of Israel, because that is where this thing is going to happen. And that while it is happening to Israel, the beast power is left in relative prosperity, for he is the instigator of all of these things. Possible? Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I have puzzled and puzzled and puzzled and wondered why it is that there is no Gentile mentioned in this particular situation. Why this protection is offered in this way at this time. So when Christ returns and all the saints have been changed, then the 7 last plagues are poured out on everybody. Now, Christ has returned, mind you. Prior to his return, you have certain people of the children of Israel who are sealed and protected from the trumpet plagues. Christ returns, collects those people, collects his own out of all the Gentile lands as well, and then begins to pour out the vials of his wrath, including one particular that's poured on the seat of the beast. At this point in time, he begins to bring to a stop the things that happen to men. At this point in time, the saints of God are no longer flesh and blood and are no longer walking around on this not-so-green earth anymore down here. Now, when we look at this, I want us to go back for a moment and take a new look at the 12th chapter of the book of Revelation. Revelation 12, verse 1. There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. What does that mean? Well, if you'll go back and refer to Genesis 37, verses 9 through 11, you'll see a dream of Joseph in which he saw himself as a star, and the sun and the moon and 11 stars doing obeisance to him. And essentially, his father and his mother saw basically what he meant by that. And the idea was that Israel, his father and his mother, and all of his brothers comprised the sun and the moon and the 12 stars. So the identity of this, and I think this is pretty well universally understood by commentators, is Israel, is this woman. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, pain to be delivered. There appeared another wonder in heaven, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. His tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. All very quickly run over. But what it's talking about is the birth of the Messiah, the attempt of this dragon in the person of one Herod to destroy the young child, how he was fled into Egypt and was protected there. So she brought forth, he was caught up into heaven. Now the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Here we are back at this 3.5-year period again. Or, as some have suggested, being a day for a year in prophecy, that this is 1,260 years, referring to a period of time in the Dark Ages when the church was off in the wilderness. But the problem is that it's very difficult to make that association, or to find a specific 1,260-year period, or to really be that definitive about it. And indeed, it is an assumption in this 12th chapter of Revelation that there are 2 separate 1,260-day periods, or a 1,260-day period and a 3.5-year period spoken of. It's an assumption. For indeed, both references could be to the same period of time. Now let's read again what we have here. The woman. What woman? The woman that brought forth the man-child. Can this woman be the church, the New Testament church? Brethren, the New Testament church did not bring forth the Messiah. The Messiah built the New Testament church. Didn't he say, "You are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church"? How could the church then be the one that brought him forth? It was the woman, clothed with the sun, with her feet on the moon, and with a crown of 12 stars that brought forth the Messiah. It was physical Israel. The woman, he says, was fled into the wilderness and was prepared for a place prepared of God, was protected for 3.5 years. Is this referring to something in the past? Or is this referring to that same 3.5-year period at the end time? Well, let's look at it. There was war in heaven. We're not told exactly when. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, that deceives the whole world. He was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused him before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and all you that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil is come down unto you having great wrath, because he knows he has only a very short time. When the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child." Now who is that? It's Israel. It's not the church. Because it was not the church that brought forth the man-child. It was Israel. Now exactly how this could be fulfilled in Israel is not really that easy to see immediately, unless we begin to realize that you have 144,000, a representation out of the 12 tribes of Israel, who are those people who have remained faithful to God in those tribes, those people who have turned to God, those Christians who are in those tribes, who represent Israel in this particular vein of prophecy. For you see, for a Christian living in Germany, in Europe, in Italy, in France, for a Christian who may be off on some expedition on a dark South Pacific island somewhere and doesn't even know what's going on in the rest of the world, the same sort of protection is not even called for. That is, for someone who is living in an area which is the absolute object of the wrath of Satan the devil. It's a thought, something to put into your study and think about for years or months to come. To the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So the earth helped the woman, opened her mouth, swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And he was angry, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. For there were some who were commandment keepers and faithful to the word of Christ who weren't wherever this particular woman was. It's interesting. You have to keep your options open when you're studying through prophecy, for you can get into a habit of looking at things the same way all the time and maybe not quite get something that God wants you to see. Now, let's go back again to the 21st chapter of the book of Luke and see if we can pick up another thing or two from the Olivet prophecy here and in Matthew. Verse 20, again, of Luke 21. Luke 21:20. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them which are in the midst of it depart out. Let them that are in the countries don't come in there. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things that are written may be fulfilled. Woe unto them that are with child, and them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Now, I think it's important to notice that the wrath is upon this people. This isn't something that's going to happen necessarily every place in the world at this moment. It isn't necessary for those living in Bonn or Dusseldorf to flee. It isn't necessary for those who are in Australia or Argentina, Buenos Aires, to flee. It is necessary for those who are in Judea to get out of there, because this is the beginning. This is the moment, just moments before the actual entry of the beast power into Jerusalem, and the beginning of 3.5 years of serious tribulation upon Israel. He goes on to say in verse 24, they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled. And that's the return of Christ, when that is put an end to. There shall be signs in the sun, the moon, the stars upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, and men's hearts failing them for fear. And I would have no doubt that that is true. And for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and with great glory. So here is the admonition for us, and the encouragement that you take heart when you see these things start. For when you see these things start, you know that your redemption is near. Wouldn't you feel that way? If you had seen Jerusalem compassed about with armies, and then you saw news that an abomination and a desolation had been set up there, wouldn't you finally at long last come to the realization that with whatever little error or understanding, or maybe not quite getting everything you have, that your redemption is now within reach? It's something you can survive. It's something you can live out to, that you can actually see Jesus Christ return in your lifetime. Once you see these things happen, it could be a tremendously encouraging thing. Now to the other account of the Olivet prophecy in Matthew 24. We want to look at just a little bit more of this, perhaps, than we had before. Beginning back in verse 13. He that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him stand in the holy place. Whoever reads, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So we have two events here that are pointed to, that you can actually have to pull them both together. One is Jerusalem surrounded with armies, and the other is the placing of the abomination of desolation. And in either or both circumstances, one is to pick him, whatever you have up, and get out. You're kind of warned to, if you're on the housetop, not to come down to take anything out of your house. You're not to come back in the field to get your clothes. You're just supposed to stop whatever you're doing. Maybe put your rake over your shoulder like you're going off to work somewhere and quietly walk over the next hill and down the next valley and over the next hill and get out of that area. For you are going into a period of time when Jerusalem is going to be occupied, a pretty wicked time, frankly, for anyone who is living in that area or still there. He says, woe unto them that give child, unto them that give suck in those days. Truth is that he's talking about in this area. But pray you that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Okay, what we're seeing then is that the placing of the abomination of desolation, the rising of the beast to power, which takes place at the same time, it all takes place probably within a matter of days. The occupation of Jerusalem begins a 3.5-year period, which is going to be referred to as a time of Jacob's trouble, a time of the greatest trouble that ever descended upon the face of the earth. There never had been a time like it before, and there never ever would be a time like it again. Then shall be great tribulation, starting then. All right, we go on. He says, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Then if any man shall say unto you, lo, here's Christ, or there, don't you believe it. For there shall arise false Christ, false prophets, and show great signs and wonders, insomuch as if it were possible they would deceive even the very elect. All sorts of people are going to try to tell you that Christ is here or Christ is there. Wherefore they say, behold, he's in the desert. Let's go out in the desert. Christ is there. Don't go there. They say, he's in a secret chamber. Don't believe it. For as the lightning comes out of the east and shines to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. What's he trying to say? He's trying to say to you, somebody tries to tell you Christ has already come. Look, there isn't going to be any doubt in anybody's mind when Christ comes. You don't have to ask the question, well, has he or hasn't he? He will have come. You'll know it. Wherever the carcass is, the eagles will be gathered together. In fact, you're going to be with him, so you don't have to be led off into the desert by somebody. When Christ comes back, you'll be there. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So when this happens, starts the tribulation, immediately after the tribulation, something is going to happen. The sun shall be darkened, the moon will not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. All the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming. He shall send his angels with a great shout of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the world to the other. Now he brought up in this chapter, we discussed it very briefly, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So let's go back to the 11th chapter of Daniel and see if we can fit this in. Now, in Daniel's prophecy, anyone living in Christ's time, unless Jesus had put this way, would have assumed that Daniel's prophecy of the abomination of desolation was history. It was over. It was gone. For indeed it had been fulfilled in type by one Antiochus Epiphanes, who had entered Jerusalem, who had stopped the daily sacrifice, who had placed the statue of Jupiter Olympus right in the holy place, had made the great abomination of desolation, had offered swine's flesh upon the altar. So they all saw in the events surrounding Antiochus Epiphanes a fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy regarding the abomination of desolation. But then Jesus reached back and took it, and he said, now, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then he put this little parenthesis in, whoever reads, let him understand. Warning that there's a chance you might not get it. You might not really understand what it's all about. Daniel 11. Talking about this vile one who is to be in the beast that comes along with that power, it says that the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he's going to be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return, have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Arms shall stand on his part. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt by flatteries. The people that know their God shall be strong and do exploits. They that understand among the people shall instruct many. A lot of people are going to be told what's going on. Yet they shall fall by the sword and flame and captivity and spoil for many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many will cleave to them with flatteries, and even some of them of understanding shall fall. To purge them, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Now, move on down to verse 40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at this man, this beast power, And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter into the glorious land. Many countries shall be overthrown. These shall escape out of his hand. Edom, Moab, the chief of the children of Ammon. He goes on talking about the things that he is going to do. But he says in verse 44, tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly make away many. Many feel that this description here of the king of the south pushing at him and coming into the Holy Land all generates a great deal of what we're talking about here. But then, after the wars that have taken place in the first, second, third, fourth trumpets, that the fifth trumpet, or first woe, is this tidings that are beginning to come down out of the north to trouble him. It is an invasion beginning to look his direction. And then that causes him to begin to make the move. That is the beast power that makes the initial move in the fifth trumpet, with the nerve gas and the 5 months of torment and so forth. And then it is the response to that on the part of this person out of the north and the east, with an army of 200 million men, that comprises the sixth trumpet and the destruction that as the beast power and this power meet, this would be the war, really, to end all wars. For when it was over, there would be no human being left alive to ever fight another war. This is what is seen by many of the commentators having to do with the fulfillment of this, and this ties very tightly into the book of Revelation. Now, chapter 12 of Daniel has some very interesting, some very obscure things people have wondered, pondered, struggled with. Let's read them. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Okay, we're in the same sort of time frame, aren't we? A time of trouble, of tribulation that has never been duplicated before nor ever will ever again in history. So that is a unique time, one time in all history. Many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth are going to awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. They that be wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now Daniel looked, and he saw one standing over there, and he said to a man clothed in linen, verse 6, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? Now that's a question anybody would like to have the answer to. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swore by him that lived forever, that it would be for a time and times and a half. The time and times and half a time. Here we are again, to a period which is, all of the commentators recognize, 3.5 years. So from the time it starts to the time it's over, we've brought this whole thing back to this 42-month period of time once again. When he shall have accomplished the scattered, the power of the holy people, all these things will be finished. Who are the holy people? Israel. When he shall have accomplished to scatter their power, to finally break them, to finally destroy them, then it is finished. Interesting. For indeed that seems to me to be precisely what is taking place in the first 6 trumpets, is the destruction or the scattering of the power of the holy people. And what happens in the 7th trumpet is the destruction, the scattering of the power of the beast. And I heard, but I didn't understand. And I said, my Lord, what will be the end of these things? He said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand. The wise will understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Why 1,290 days? I thought it was 1,260 days, or 42 months. Well, that's where I begin to wonder about this 13th month. A year, and a month, and a day, and an hour that comprises the 6th trumpet. And one begins to look at this and say, from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, you have got a period of time of about 42 months, or 3.5 years, or 3.5 years plus a month, if there's an intercalary year in here, during which time the beast power will hold sway, during which time there will be a time of great tribulation, the likes of which the world has never seen. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, 1,290 days. Until what? It doesn't say, does he? But it is until the time when there will be time no longer, as the angel swore. It is the time of the end that is spoken of in the verse just previous to this. It is the time of the return of Jesus Christ. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,305 days. Now, what on earth is that? Well, it's another month and a half, really, I believe, isn't it? Something like that. You got 1,290 plus 35 and 10, 45, plus 45 days. So you got another month and a half. That's why I said earlier that I kind of halfway wonder if the period of time encompassed in the seventh trumpet or the seven last plagues is 45 days, a month and a half. And that, if so, that would give us the connection, which many of us have often wondered about, between the 1,290 days and the 1,335 days. But that is speculative. But go your way till the end be, for you shall rest and stand in your lot at the end of the days. Now, let's turn back in conclusion to the 24th chapter of Matthew, see what we're supposed to do about all this. As I said, what I wanted to do today was to take the return of Christ and back up a little bit, because sometimes at any given point in time it's hard to know where you are. And you have no way of knowing ahead of time when all these things are going to start, begin, when the abomination of desolation is going to set up. And maybe these things won't be quite exactly what we believe they will be. There may be any number of variations, but I honestly believe that anyone with God's Spirit is going to spot it when it comes. But you won't spot it unless you understand what the Bible says, so that you can actually have it come to mind when the events begin to take place, so that you can recognize what is going on. Now, Jesus says in Matthew 24, right after he's talked about the sound of the great trumpet and the gathering of the elect, "Now," he says, "learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is still tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is close. So likewise, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away. My words will not pass away." Now, what does he mean by that? He means that the generation that sees it all begin will see it all end, that it will not be something that drags on. And I haven't taken us back a full generation. I've only taken us back for the 3.5-year period that is going to precede Jesus Christ's return. I have not gone back into the 7 seals, not at all. But of that day and hour knows no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. As the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered into the ark, and did not know until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. How can that be? How can that possibly be, in view of a third of the population dying and so forth? I think the answer lies in the fact that it's not a third of the population of the earth that dies. It's a third of the population of Israel that dies in a sudden, surprise, nuclear attack which leaves them absolutely unable to respond. Nuclear, or maybe something that you and I don't even know about yet. That Israel, as a people, are suddenly destroyed. That the events of the 7 trumpets take place not on all of the world, but on part of the world. And that when Jesus Christ returns, there may be a Christian in the southern part of Germany standing alongside of a non-Christian, grinding at the mill. And whenever the sign of the Son of Man appears in heaven, one's taken and the other is left. And the one that is taken before the 7 last plagues are poured out in the presence of the Lamb and in the presence of the saints. He goes on then, "Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord does come. But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. So you be ready, for in such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man comes. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord has made ruler over his household to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find having fled for his life." Sound right? No, it doesn't, does it? Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find so doing. Carrying on with his task, doing in the place he's supposed to be, doing what he's supposed to be doing, carrying on with the work of God right up until the moment that Christ takes him away from it. "Verily I say unto you, he shall make him ruler over all his goods." Tell me, is it going to be a question of what you have figured out about the return of Christ, or what you're supposed to do, that's going to make the difference when these angels come roaring down, and I don't know what numbers are, and begin to go around God's people and putting marks on them to pick out this one here and that one there and this one another place to be protected? Is it because maybe you're foolish enough that you don't know where to go or where the place of safety is, that you'll just be left out of it? Nonsense. This is a matter of the selection or the election of God that will take place when that happens. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he comes, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, he'll make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming. You know, there's a funny thing I think has happened to a lot of us in the last few years. Because of the fact that we were kind of misled, led down the garden path, as it were, dates were set which never took place, that we have said to ourselves, oh, well, Jesus Christ may not come back for another 50 or 100 years. It may not even be in my lifetime. And we say, my Lord delays his coming. And, of course, it's entirely possible that we're right that it may be another 20 years. I mean, you might be correct in your assumption. It's not merely saying in your heart that my Lord delays his coming. It is allowing yourself the change in conduct based upon that delay. That you begin to act like one who thinks his Lord's coming is a way off somewhere, instead of like a servant who realizes that for me, as far as I am concerned, and for the decisions that are going to affect my life, I've got to be ready at any moment of time for what God may do. For the decisions that are going to affect you most could be made 3.5 years, 1,290 days or more before the return of Jesus Christ. If that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delays his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looks not for him, in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of the teeth. This entire prophecy was given in answer to a question. The question is asked in verse 3. As he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? The answer given in chapter 24 and 25 really is, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons appointed of the Father. There will be time enough for you to know when the time comes. There will be signs by which you can recognize all of this, but it's not for you to know right now the seasons which God has put in his hands. That's one aspect of the answer he gave them, but he gave them two aspects to this answer. One was, it's not for you to know, and the other is, be ready for it whenever it happens. That's what the message of Matthew 24 and 25 and the Olivet prophecy is. So, could Jesus come tonight? Well, of course, he can come anytime he wants to, and be very welcome by all of us. But the prophecies make it clear that there are some things that must happen prior to Christ's return, which have not happened at this period of time. And it's for you and I, as faithful servants, to continue to watch, not cry wolf, not get people to where they say, oh, well, you've set dates 100 times and you've been wrong every time, and you keep saying Christ's return is soon, to the point they will not listen to us anymore. It's important to us to watch and to be responsible and to be ready for our Lord in whatever hour he comes.